I'm Caroline Pennington, your host. I'm here today with Maryam Taheri. She's joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here and just talk about the things I feel like we talk about regularly anyway. So happy to share all the thoughts.
Yes, I'm so excited to have the opportunity to sit down with you. Maryam is a VC-backed founder, certified life and executive coach, startup advisor, board member, leadership expert, and dog mom as well. So thank you for being here.
I'm happy to be here. I love it when someone asks me for a bio, and I have thought a lot about it. It makes me sound really busy, and let's be honest, that is life, but it's interesting when you hear your own bio reflected back to you. I think it's a great point for me to reflect on, wow, I sound really busy, but also like what's the most important to me? And I always like to put dogs on there because for one reason in particular, one, I'm obsessed with my dogs. My dogs are my life, but two, I tend to have a broad background because I've found that you can find anything in common with anyone. And having the things that matter most to you help you form those more genuine connections.
Yes, I love that. And I love that you included the dog mom on your LinkedIn because it just makes it humanizing. I mean, it makes it just like, oh, I'm a dog mom too. Like, why not just
Well, and
drop
when
that?
we first met, I think we talked about our dogs too. So it's like, it's my life is not just the things that I do for work every day and the things that I do as a part of my long-term career. And it's really easy to forget that oftentimes. And for someone who, and I'm referring to myself here, who has tied their identity so much to their jobs and careers down the line and being a founder, I had to take a real look and step back and really figure out my own identity on a larger level. And it isn't just the work that I do in my job every day.
That's so huge. And so, while we're on that topic, tell us more about your journey. I mean, you've worked for a lot of different companies, you've been a founder. What did your journey look like to where you are now today?
Oh my gosh, my Persian American family is going to cry a little bit at this one, but I thought I was going to be a doctor or a vet. And I did the whole, apply, get in, then not go. And that was like definitely the tears happened around that one. But it was the right decision for me at the time. And to be totally honest, I had worked my butt off in undergrad, so much so that I had published in undergrad. I had worked, I mean, school was my life. I had class every day from like 8 to 6. I had labs multiple days a week. I needed a hot minute break. And so I had originally deferred and I actually started working at a startup while I was in undergrad, and then it was all over, right? And then I was sucked in, and that has been my life ever since. And so I had originally thought I was on this very different like path with my life, and I don't think I had ever as a kid dreamed of being a startup founder or starting my own company. Now, I had always dabbled in having a business and being an entrepreneur of some kind, but I never had at a young age made that exact connection to being a startup founder. I think there are differences to being sort of a VC backed founder and just an entrepreneur in different ways, but I always knew I wanted to help people and change the world. How that would happen, no clue. So my journey kind of evolved with saying yes to opportunities and things that aligned with my values and the things that served me, and no to things that didn't. And I'd say that the best and most amazing opportunities that I've learned from throughout my career have come about because I've done that.
I love that because I mean, I being able to work so hard and get in medical school and then not to take that path and then take the entrepreneur path, that's a hard one too. I mean, I'm sure you learned so many lessons throughout that journey.
Yeah, and then I went back to grad school years later, and that was an interesting experience. which surprisingly, most of the people who went back to grad school at the same time as me were in my age range, but there were also people, fresh out of their undergrad. And I felt really glad to sort of take that sort of breather and break in between. But in many ways, I've had a really non-traditional journey. But I think we're also seeing a major shift in the way that people get where they need to get in their careers. Like my undergrad was in biochemistry. I double majored. I minored in photography. I was working in a lab nonstop. And while, yes, in some of my roles and in some of the pieces in my career, that has been a really pivotal and important thing, it also hasn't, right? And so I have found it really eye-opening for me as I continue to grow in my career, as I can continue to grow in the things that I want. The skills that I need and the things that I want to do have just shifted, and they've shifted multiple times. There was a point that I had gone really deep in my career and I had worked in med device. There was a point that I was working in clinical trials. There was a point that I was working in consumer goods. There was a point that I was really focused on digital health and then brick and mortar healthcare delivery. And then there were times I focused on reimbursement and insurance a little bit more. So even though I've sort of had this general path of being in consumer goods and healthcare my entire career, it has looked so different. And at each inflection point, I learned either, oh, this is really up my alley and I want to do that, or no. And it's never been in the way that I think I ever expected it to be. I would not say I've had this linear path. Again, it's being open to opportunity, saying yes to things that serve me and are aligned, and no to things that don't. And I think some of the hardest things recently in the last 3 months, I've said no to two what looked like amazing opportunities, but I knew for whatever reason they weren't the right next step for me. And that's such an interesting journey to go on, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and for someone like myself, I'm in this again, this interesting place where leaving my startup, sort of in this place of figuring out what's next, doing some really, really phenomenal work at such a larger scale now at a publicly traded company, and being able to make an impact at this like major level, right? In comparison, you know, it has been incredibly eye-opening, and I have learned so many incredible things. But in I could have never predicted that this would be my journey or that these steps would have gotten me here. I just feel really grateful while there have been really high highs and really low lows. What I can say is that I've learned so much at each inflection point in my career, and all of them continue to bring me closer to what I need at this current state and future state in time.
So speaking of which, you touched on something that I'm very passionate as well about. What are you seeing in the market with employers having to rethink things and how they recruit and how they retain talent?
I'm glad you asked this because I've been on both sides of the table of being an employee and an employer. And
Mm-hmm.
what we're seeing right now is a continuous shift between like an employee and an employer market.
Mm-hmm.
So with COVID, we saw this major shift and pull to remote work. Now we are seeing many companies asking folks to return to
Mm.
work. So,
Yeah.
one, you have a lot of people who still want to work remotely. So you have, more people competing for remote jobs. You have talent competing for remote jobs across the country. You have some
Mm-hmm.
people who desperately want to return to work, others who don't. And a lot of people have moved to these sort of Zoom cities.
Mm.
They moved somewhere because they could Zoom, right? They could sort of work from wherever, and maybe they can't anymore. We're
Mm-hmm.
also at this really interesting time where there are a ton of layoffs happening.
Yes. I think the news has a lot of doom and gloom in that department, especially in the tech space and with the banks right now. But in my professional opinion, I feel like the market's where it was pre-pandemic. Do you? I feel like the market went crazy after the pandemic. People were hiring.
Totally.
I was swamped as a recruiter, and then now things have calmed down this year, and it's leveled out. We're not in recession mode. It's not 2008, 2009, but we're back where we were 2 years ago. So do you think?
Absolutely. I think the big thing that I'm seeing is companies scaled to meet the needs of the pandemic and scaled for a lot of different reasons. And now they're just seeing different needs. So if you
Mhm.
really look at who is getting laid off, in some cases, it's a lot of recruiting and HR teams. And that's really because companies are saying, we're not going to be hiring as much. We're trying to just stay really lean through this
Mhm.
recession. We want to be fiscally conservative. So I am seeing a lot of fear-based decision making, and I'm seeing a lot of sort of, well, the market's not great. We just want to be conservative, which is also smart. People want to be lean. I also see people just reorging, right? They're finding that the things that they needed aren't actually the things that they need. So I think what can be really challenging is you had a lot of people working remotely. Now you've seen a bunch of layoffs, so there's a lot of people searching for jobs. There may
Mhm.
or may not be as many remote positions out there. So you have more people competing for remote positions from all over the place because they
Mhm.
don't want to go back to work. And so I think it's a really interesting time for employers to reconsider return to work, which is, I don't think all jobs need to return to work personally. I don't
Right.
think that they need to return to work at all for a lot of people. I think that there is the ability for people to be as productive remotely. I also think there are options for hybrid work. What happens when you only say, we're only focusing on in person, you're going to miss out on a really big talent pool. You're going to miss out on some of the best people for that right role. I will say that time zones do factor in here, though. And
Mhm.
it is really hard. People can say that it works. And in some cases, I absolutely do think it does. But, if someone's on Pacific time and someone's on, East Coast time, Eastern time, it doesn't, it is challenging. You'd be amazed how so few hours can be impactful. I think the other
Mhm.
thing that employers need to think about is people are burnt out. People are burnt out from the pandemic that hasn't gone away. People have been faced with this consistent sort of decision fatigue around all these major, insane world events that we've just had in the last 3 years.
Mhm.
It's we're recording this and it's, sort of 3 years ago, this time frame was when we
Mhm.
all went in lockdown.
Yep.
That is not that long. We are just starting to see things sort of quote unquote return to normal, but places like the US Passport Office, they still have their COVID protocols. Like you can't do the same things and engage with the passport office in the same way that you did pre-COVID. So there
Mhm.
are still, things that have gone away since COVID. And so I just want to reflect that while we have, we are safe and able to be in physical locations together mentally, I think everybody is still sort of in this fight or flight burnout cycle because you think about it, it's like I remember the murder hornets and then, everyone being afraid of World War III, and this now there is some massive fungal infection, and there's
Mhm.
this constant, I think, state of like fear and reaction that people are having. So now the recession too, it's a lot of mental load for our employees.
Mhm.
And in light of all this, in light of people going to work from home, they're
Mhm.
also reevaluating what their priorities are. We're seeing fewer women returning to work. We're seeing a lot of that happening because, caretaking priorities and other components there. People are retiring at higher rates right now as well because they're like, I don't want to work, and everybody says, a standard work week is 40 hours. I don't know a single person who works only 40 hours a week.
Right.
So I was watching this video. I'll have to send it to you. It was like on, I watch way too much TikTok, but it was like an actual audit of like nobody actually works 40 hours a week. So let's say you work like 45 to 50 on average. you get so few vacation days. Like, how many hours besides just like eating and showering do we actually have to like live our life? And I think it was something like 1,000 hours, or it was very small. Whatever it was, I don't even think it was 1,000 hours. It was probably like 100 hours or something, but it was ridiculous. And it's like we need to move away from this notion of there is something such as work-life balance, because it doesn't exist. And we're chasing this like fantasy in my mind. At the end of the day, you have to, especially as women, make a sacrifice in some area of your life. And I do believe, like, to a certain extent, like, you can sort of do it all. But I was watching these speeches from like Serena Williams, and Shonda Rhimes, of like, they're like, I can't do it all. I am sacrificing something every single day, whether it's caretaking in my family or work.
Mm.
And people don't want to sacrifice as much, I think, anymore. I think people want to figure out a better balanced situation for themselves, which is why we're seeing people retire. Why we're seeing fewer women returning to work. We're seeing women not take executive and senior leadership positions because they cannot, they don't have that support. And so what employers can do, if they want to retain these critical employees and understand their responsibilities as employers, is really rethink benefits, what return to work really does look like, but also just what is the work-life culture that they want to support and propel forward.
I think that's huge. I mean, employers have to rethink those things. And then my next question was, I mean, how do you retain these people? I mean, do you have open conversations with them about their timelines? I mean, what do you think in that regard?
So what I found with, by the time my employee has sort of said goodbye, they've been thinking about it for 6 months or longer. I think
Yeah.
it's going to be a really interesting time because almost, I don't even know, I'm making statistics up today. Based on my peer group, I would say 80% of the people that I know are not happy in their job right now.
Mm.
I think I've seen statistics online that it's somewhere between that sort of 60 and 80%. I would imagine that most people are turtling in their jobs right now because of this uncertainty. I
Mm-hmm.
think we saw that great resignation. I have a feeling that next year, or whenever the market calms down, we're going to see sort of again people leaving their jobs. What employers can consider is there's a lot you can do prior to having a sort of retention conversation, because if you are having a retention conversation with your employee and you're solely focused on compensation, we're
Mm-hmm.
seeing people at higher rates take lower paying jobs. They're
Mm.
taking reductions in titles. Why? Work-life balance. So employers need to rethink their employee culture and how they are doing their work. And that really, I mean, this is the number one thing that I think most employers fail at, is capacity planning and workforce planning. Usually they don't have the right people in the right roles, and they're either doing too much or they're
Mm.
not aligned on the priorities and the things that the business needs to do. So employers need to have clearly defined objectives and then decide and really ruthlessly prioritize how they're going to get those things done and who are the people that are best suited to get those things done. So I'm hopeful that these sort of layoffs and these reorgs are because employers are trying to get more to that space. But I
Mm-hmm.
think the other thing is employers need to bake in anti-burnout prevention. And that looks like people burn out. There's studies on this. People burn out because they're not clear on their role. They don't have the authority and the autonomy to get their job done, and they feel stuck. And so really it comes down to, there's a lot of like distrust. So it's not just compensation, which compensation is a whole nother conversation. And it's really, I like to use the word, and a lot of people use it, which is total rewards, which is thinking through, your total compensation, your benefits and things like that. You're also looking at, is there psychological safety in the organization? Are you actually, really instilling, DEIB practices and policies throughout the organization that are tangible? Are you training your managers? Most people leave because of their manager, right?
Mm-hmm.
So are you training leadership on how to support people? And what I do feel for here is a lot of people have a manager who supports them, but the manager can't make anything happen. Like they can't change the organization, they can't do all these things. But I think there are very simple things that companies can do to make a tangible impact and retain employees, which is what we were talking about. I mean, for a C-suite team member, it can cost 2 to 3 times their salary to
Mm-hmm.
replace them. And it's
Oh, yeah.
not just that, you lose job knowledge too, right? So it's a huge cost. I know many companies who have tens of millions of dollars that it costs them annually in employee voluntary turnover.
Yep.
You can impact your bottom line by retaining these employees. So, like my first thing is really look at your compensation philosophy, really
Mm-hmm.
look at your total rewards, look at your benefits. Most people do not think, they're like, oh, well, we sponsor employee health insurance, but how much is it actually costing your employees? Is your
Mm-hmm.
employee actually having to pay $200 to $300 to $500 out of pocket a month? Would it make a huge difference to your employee if you actually just covered all of their health insurance? That is something that makes a huge difference. It means they get to keep more of their salary. And if you're already paying, $10 million a year in employee turnover, like what's the cost benefit here? So really like look at that. I think the other thing is leave types and understanding like what is work-life balance. I'm a huge proponent of the 4-day work week. I
Mm-hmm.
think that people need to rethink parental leave. 8 weeks is a joke. Most of the companies that I see that are really being thoughtful about this are doing 3 to 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not requiring it to be in chunks. I love the companies that are like, use it within a year, right? That's great. Really rethinking leave types, separate vacation from sick time. I do not like policies that have sick and vacation time lumped in together. It creates a culture where people don't feel like they're allowed to be sick, and they
Mm-hmm.
work through being sick, and then they continue to burn out. I think that every company should have at least 1 week a year that they just shut down, where there's no pressure, and that's not included in people's vacation time. I tend to find that like most companies in production shuts down around the holidays anyway. So just close. Just close. Like give people a break, right? So I think there's so many things that are really low-hanging fruit
Mm-hmm.
that can really help with employee retention and make people feel like an employer cares about them. But at the end of the day, it isn't that hard to just ask your employees like, what do you need?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right. There's so many things that employers can do that are, I mean, the benefits thing, some things cost, a dollar amount, but a lot of things that they can do are free. And then also providing them a safe workplace so that they can have these open conversations with you as their manager about what they need and what they can do to help best support them, you know?
Totally. And I think what's really interesting is the US Surgeon General last year, yeah, in 2022, released their priorities on workplace well-being
Mm,
because they are seeing increased rates of mental health issues,
mm-hmm.
burnout, and people not wanting to return to work. And they're outlined, in there things about, protection from harm. So we're talking that psychological safety component. We're talking about opportunity for growth. We're talking about recognition. We're talking about having like meaning at work. We're talking about sort of flexibility. And so there are things that people can do, but what I constantly hear back is cost. And you brought that up, which is, well, have you actually looked at what it is costing you right now to lose these employees? Because
Mm-hmm.
studies actually show that engaged employees have higher sales rates, They
Mm-hmm.
have higher production. You make more money when you have employees who believe in what you're doing and who you treat well. And let me tell
Yes.
you, I have plenty of friends who have companies who may have a 4-day work week and quote unquote unlimited vacation and work less, who are doing amazing and are highly profitable. So these things are possible. It's a shift though. It's a shift from this like previous way of working that I think is harder for some generations. It's also a generational thing for people to adopt. And, actually a bill was just proposed. I can't remember what representative proposed it to the House of Representatives to push for a 4-day work week. Now, this wouldn't mandate employers to provide a 4-day work week, but what it would do is for salaried employees working 32 hours a week or more, you're required to pay them differently and look at their compensation differently. So it doesn't necessarily say, you can only work 4 days, but it does incentivize it. And it does sort of say, well, hey, you're asking people to work more than actually makes sense. We need you to then compensate those people appropriately. And I
Mm-hmm.
love that because I think 2 days is not enough to recharge with the way that we have people work.
Yeah, no, I agree totally. And I feel like happy employees translates to happy customers, which translates to, you know, more more opportunity, more profits, more all the things. At least that's what I've seen in my seat. So
Absolutely. And, we remember the bad managers and the leaders. We remember the good ones too. And I
yes,
think a big thing that I want people to take away from this who are founders and executives who can enact change is really look at your bottom line and all the things that are contributing to it. Like, go pull your voluntary turnover cost per employee because I guarantee you, no matter what your metric is, it's actually higher because you're losing so much institutional knowledge and the ability to push things forward. Really look at that and let's look at how much that's costing you. And really, let's look at like, are your employees actually engaged? And if
mm-hmm.
they're not, you have a lot that you can do to drive your profits and drive sort of what you're doing as a business. I think employers that fail to keep up with these changing employee needs are going to have a lot of struggle coming up because this is only going to be something that people are going to continue to care about and is focused on.
Definitely. So many good nuggets here. I appreciate it so much. So, as we wrap up today, how can our listeners find you and follow along?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, Maryam Taheri. I'll have the link in the show notes to my podcast, sort of the work that I do. I'm always on Medium, I'm always on Twitter. It's just my name. So you can find me all of those places. And I'd love to have a conversation with anyone. If any of this is passionate, you find passion around any of this, love to talk to you at any time.
Perfect. Thanks.
Thank you.